let's take this slide to talk about the Korean War, or technically the Korean conflict, as official war was never declared on anybody, but we know it as the Korean War, so we'll call it that, even though technically it wasn't a war. Now, the Korean War here is known as the Forgotten War. Fewer books, movies, studies are done about it than any other American war. I'm not quite sure why. It's incredibly significant. It's the first heating up of the Cold War, the first conflict that we see. And the Cold War sometimes is known as a proxy war because the U.S. and the Soviet Union never actually fight each other. It's always communism fighting democracy or capitalism, but it's never the U.S. and the Soviet Union fighting each other. We always have another country fighting instead, a proxy war, somebody fighting for us. And in this case, it's the Koreans. Okay? Sadly, what little most Americans know about the Korean War, they learned from watching MASH, a sitcom on TV, a comedy, drama, a little bit of everything, incredibly long-running, one of the longest-running primetime TV shows in history. But it's set during Korea, and most people, that's what little they know. So let's talk about the Korean War, or the Korean conflict here. Okay? And it starts with the division of Korea at the 38th parallel. If you look at the equator on the map and you count 38 lines up, you get the 38th parallel. Okay? At the end of World War II, Japan had conquered Korea during the war, but Japan loses, so they have to give it back. Problem is, who do they give it back to? The Soviet Union wants Korea as part of their little Soviet bloc. The United States wants Korea to be a free democratic country, so what ends up happening is they divide it right along this line here, the 38th parallel. Everything north of that line would be communist North Korea. Everything south of that line would be free democratic South Korea. The north supported by the Soviet Union and China all along its border. The south supported by the United States and the United Nations. Okay? Now, the war begins on June 25th, 1950. You see a sign here. The war began here, June 25, 1950, when North Korean troops surprised everybody, especially South Korea, and crossed the 38th parallel, invading South Korea. Okay? You'll see a whole series of little dotted lines and dates on here. Okay, we're going to talk about those. Those mark sort of demarcation points. So on June 25th, 1950, North Korean troops crossed the 30th parallel into South Korea, completely catching South Korea by surprise. They pushed South Korean troops all the way down through South Korea until South Korean troops have hunkered down in this little blue dot right here, okay, called Pusan, P-U-S-A-N. Now, this is Pusan, port city, right here. Okay? So North Korea controlled all of South Korea except this little area, the dotted line there, right around Pusan, where the South Korean troops had holed up. Now, they conquered all that land in just over, what, June, July, August, September, October, about 3 months. June, July, August, September. By September of 1950, the front lines of the war were right here around Pusan. Now, let me give you an idea of some size here. The Korean Peninsula, North and South Korea combined, the Korean Peninsula right here is about the same size as Kentucky and Tennessee combined. So we're talking about a very small area. That's a lot of movement in a short period of time. Well, it's because it's not a lot of room here. Kentucky and Tennessee combined, this whole area right there. So by September 1950, the front lines were right here. Okay? When North Korea invaded South Korea, okay, it sort of set the United States at alarm here, okay, and proved that we couldn't relax. Communism was a threat to spread any time. Okay? So the National Security Council, remember they're the guys who update the president every day on things going on around the world. The National Security Council writes a memo to the president. It's called NSC 68. NSC stands for National Security Council, and it's the 68th memo they've written. It's not a real original name. Okay? But NSC 68 will recommend that the United States quadruple its defense spending. They say we need to spend 4 times what we're currently spending on defense if we're going to be able to contain the spread of communism. That we're not prepared, we're not ready. And because of that, the military will be greatly enlarged. Okay, back to our war here. If you'll recall, the North Koreans have captured everything in South Korea except the area around Busan. That is when the South Koreans scream for help and the United Nations comes to their aid. General Douglas MacArthur, okay, hero of World War II, rebuilder of Japan, will be put in charge of all United Nations troops. Remember, if you look at the map here, MacArthur is right here in Japan, right next to Korea. So it's easy enough for MacArthur to take his troops in Japan and help out the South Koreans. There will be about 20 different United Nations countries that send troops to help the South Koreans. 20 different countries send troops, but 90% of the troops fighting are Americans. 90% of all the soldiers fighting to help South Korea are Americans. So MacArthur, and here you see MacArthur up at the top there, and the South Korean president, Syngman Rhee. MacArthur will be put in charge. And instead of landing troops right here in Busan and slugging his way out, MacArthur is going to do something incredibly radical and incredibly dangerous. Okay? He is going to land his troops at a place called Incheon. Incheon. Okay? If you look at the map, Incheon is the pink dot right there. Well, right around where I'm clicking. There you go. Incheon is that little pink dot. It is a port city, okay, on the coast, and if you'll notice, that's an odd place to land because the North Koreans control all of this. So MacArthur is landing behind enemy lines. He'll take his troops from Japan and land behind enemy lines at Incheon. An amphibious landing going from sea to land. It's very difficult, very dangerous, especially when you're behind enemy lines. But MacArthur takes the North Koreans completely by surprise. Okay? He will recapture all of South Korea, and then he will cross the 30th parallel into North Korea. Okay? And he will, in just 2 months, you see the date up here, by November 1950, MacArthur will have recaptured all of South Korea and all of North Korea up to this dotted line. Okay? So, again, in only 2 months, we've gone all the way down here, back there. So now we've gone down and back up. Okay? The border between China and North Korea is the Yalu River. Okay? It's this border right here, this river, the Yalu River. And as MacArthur starts to approach the Yalu River right here, China starts to get very nervous. Very nervous. Okay? And China will cross the border and join the North Koreans. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers are now in the fight. And MacArthur will suddenly find himself greatly outnumbered. And by January of 1951, just 2 months later, the North Koreans and the Chinese now have recaptured all of North Korea, crossed the 38th parallel again, and moved to this dot right here. Okay. They've recaptured the South Korean capital, very significant, the little black dot right there. The South Korean capital of Seoul, S-E-O-U-L, that's Seoul, the little black dot right there. So we've gone down, back up, and back down again. Okay. Once the Chinese are in the fight, MacArthur calls on President Truman to escalate the war. He wants to step up the war. He wants to bomb Chinese military bases. He even considers using the atomic bomb against China. But Truman is not quite ready for that, because Truman realizes that any attack on China is liable to not stop with an attack on China. It's liable to bring the Soviet Union into the war. And if we do that, we're looking at World War III. So Truman refuses to escalate the war. He refuses to allow MacArthur to re-attack and cross the border into China. MacArthur's argument is, look, if we're here to fight communists, there's about 1 million of them right on the other side of the Yalu River. Let's go get them. Right? Truman refuses to authorize that. It is at that point that MacArthur publicly criticizes the president, his commander-in-chief, calls Truman a coward. Truman can't allow that to happen, this broach of military protocol. And then on April 11, 1951, so remember, we were down here in January 51. Okay. On April 11, 1951, President Harry Truman will fire General Douglas MacArthur. He removes him from command. Okay. This is a public relations nightmare for Truman because MacArthur is extremely popular. Okay. And MacArthur will be replaced by General Matthew Ridgway. Okay. Matthew Ridgway will replace MacArthur. Okay. It is at that point that a stalemate sets in. Now, a stalemate is where neither side can make any headway. Neither side can gain an advantage. And for the last 2 years of the war, we spend the whole war fighting right around here. Right about back where we started. Most of the last 2 years of the war are fought back and forth, back and forth, back and forth in this area. Neither side can make much headway. So a stalemate sets in. Eventually, peace talks will result in the end of the war. Peace talks will go on for almost 2 years before an agreement is reached. And the agreement will be to keep Korea divided right along here, at the division between the darker orange and the lighter orange. That's the new dividing line, right almost where we started at the 38th parallel. The new dividing line between North and South Korea is the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, meaning no military is allowed there. The demilitarized zone. Okay. The DMZ is a 2.5-mile wide strip of land that goes all the way across the peninsula. It's about 160 miles long. A 2.5-mile wide strip of land right there. And the only thing keeping North Korea from marching into South Korea or South Korea from marching into North Korea are over 1 million landmines. In the DMZ are over 1 million landmines. That's the only thing separating those two countries. I have heard tell, I don't know if it's true or not, but I've heard, thanks to the movement to get rid of landmines, that if you added up all the landmines in the world, you still wouldn't have as many as there are in this 160-mile long 2.5 mile wide strip of land right there. Right? Now what you see, this little white dot right there, right? Little white dot, is a city, for lack of a better term. It's not really a city, but called Panmunjom. Panmunjom. It is a government city right in the middle of the DMZ. There's one road leading into Panmunjom from the north and one road leading into Panmunjom from the south. Okay? This picture here in the bottom right, that's Panmunjom. Okay? It's a government city. There's a line running right down the middle. These blue buildings, whenever the North and South Koreans get together to meet, they meet in these buildings. So they're not in either country. They're in the demilitarized zone. These are North Korean guards. These are South Korean guards. They spend all day staring at each other, but nobody dares cross the line. It's one of the most unique, interesting places on Earth here. And in class, we'll look at sort of the difference between North and South Korea. I'll show you a map, striking difference between the two. Okay. But anyway, that's the Korean War. We're still divided today. It's a mess.